It's nearing day's end. The travel is done for the day. You finish setting up camp. The clearing is nice, warm in the evening sun. You hear the sound of the birds and the babbling brook nearby. Your skill is being honed to what is comfortable, your soul and your heart missing home. You've been on the road for a long time, and this journey is not quite over yet. You reach into your satchel, some things that remind you of a time not burdened by the adventure you're on now. The quest, the gold, all but distant promises in the future, and not quite memories yet. You find your set of brushes, and you find your paints. Come sit with me behind the DM screen today. It's time to do some crafts. Now, when you're going to be painting, you want to make sure you have your nice little tabletop setup, whatever you have, right? A good spot to do it. Your brushes, whatever little thing you want to torture yourself with trying to paint this time, and a nice clean palette. I said a nice clean palette. There, that's better. Once you got that all out, go through and make sure you know what kind of colors you want. I've been doing kind of a lot of a reddish purple for these little town watch guys in 15 millimeter. And we're just, don't pay too much attention to the front of that armor. That is going to be kind of a bluish, rune fang-ish steel color, almost like a cobalty steel. It's my way of doing kind of, maybe not magical, maybe not mystical, but if the players see something different on him, they're going to at least want to talk to him or see what's up with him. Anything that I can get the players to acknowledge as a difference on the table. You compare him to his little buddy over here, and they have very similar things going on, but one is obviously, I mean, the different pose, the different styling, and then, of course, the much more drastic color. And he's not done. There's still more layers of paint to do. So, now that you have your clean palette and your brushes and everything, select the first couple of paints you're going to do. I like to go through and do the darkest base colors on the 2 or 3 largest areas of a model first, which on these 15 millimeter boys is next to nothing. So once I get my paint selected and figure out what I'm going to do, I will be right back. All right, we are back. I have my paints. And I always like to start with a slightly thinned down whitewash or a light wash for a lot of the 15 millimeters, because then I use contrast paints. It's kind of cheating, I know. If you don't have white, I do like this Arid Earth. Actually works amazingly well for anything that's going to be out in natural light, or like the setting that I have right now for my campaign and for actually my own RPG. Called Mythic, Mythiq. It's a Victorian split steampunk style that uses science to bridge gaps in magic, and it's really kind of interesting. I can't talk too much about the storyline just because we're still in development with the game. But we will be showing a bit more as it comes along, so that's been fantastic. We have the story in final drafting right now, but you're here to talk about painting, and I know that y'all know what you need to paint. I don't think there's too many people that don't know how to paint here, but I like going over things because, you know, sometimes you forget, sometimes you miss things, and these little guys are super, super small. You can see, though, you know, 3D printing at 15 mil, you don't have to be super precise. It's more about just having that representation out there, and then using a slightly larger mini for your players. Also works as like a hero scale versus non-hero scale. So it depends on what kind of game you want to run. I had some of these 15 millimeter people trapped under rocks that I printed out. So that was quite fun. And we're just going to be trying to go over color schemes and paint schemes. I think I have a good thing going with that green and that red. And then kind of that like plasma bolt color elsewhere. And like the elites and lieutenants and things. What kind of color schemes do y'all like? Do y'all do wargaming? Or do y'all just stick with like D&D and stuff like that? I'm curious to see what people are actually into and what people are still playing, because I know that there's niche subgroups and I know that there's people playing games that no longer exist. Also, I apologize. If you're looking for a quick form like tutorial of how to paint, that's not what I do here. We might turn into that, but for right now, I like to be kind of the island that people that are overloaded with their senses, that have too much of the worldly go in their heads. I want to go through and get that squared away. I want to make sure that people have a safe place in that turmoil that's not just constantly pressuring them to go and overstimulate. So we're just gonna Bob Ross it on a D&D level together, right? We're gonna do things that are super happy and super fun. Sorry about that. Had a phone call. Anyways, so yeah, we're doing very relaxed things here. Make sure I have the right brushes. And we're just going to go ahead. I like using a big old fat brush for a lot of the white. That is, decently larger than what I need. But that's the way I personally like it. And then since I do want kind of a cooler tone on these, I will actually be using a matte white for a undercoat. Undercoat, primer, whatever you want to call it. I don't really thin down the Army Painter matte white too much because it already is fairly thin. Not in like a negative way, but in that it goes on relatively smoothly. Make sure you have a water cup, because I don't know if anybody saw that when I sat down, but I don't have a water cup or a towel, so I'll be right back again. There we go. Now, if we look closely or not so closely, I have the proper apparatus for what I am doing. So if you ever think that a game master and or a pastor is more organized than other people, you are severely mistaken. At least in my case, you are. Other people probably way more organized than me. This is my first time painting with a camera setup like this. I've heard other people talk about how odd and awkward it is to paint on camera. So here we're just gonna try it out. And yeah, I'm getting a lot on here, but I want to get the thickest where the most color is gonna be, because I want that to really stand out to my players. And then the nice trick here is just to get your brush a bit wet and remove almost all that paint, right? And then with a slightly damp brush, we're just going to go over some of the areas that we want to kind of remove. Sorry, that was not. We just went over some areas here to remove some of the, stronger white. And I know I should be thinning out and doing my test patch on my skin. Right? Painting isn't about being perfect. It's about taking yourself away from the day and just doing what you love. I know I could be using tweezers for this. I don't know why I like the feel of like the miniatures in my hand. And I know there's stringing, there's some terrible things. I like getting rid of the stringing later on these smaller models just because then it gives me a little bit of a safety net for some of the small details when I do go over on the painting. And again, it's 15 millimeters, so this is the most anyone's going to look at it. Most times anyone's going to see it, it's going to look, like that. So we're just doing this to have fun and put some color on the board. All right? We shouldn't hold ourselves to any ridiculous standards when it's a hobby that we love. All right? Why else would we do it? If you don't love the hobby, why are you doing it? But that's just what we're doing, is we're just taking our time and going down. I did 3D print these. I have a Ender 3 V3 Plus, and I have loved it very much. Sadly, I just ran out of filament. And all of my money so far goes to my ministry. We were feeding people that couldn't afford meals for a little while, throughout the holidays and through the winter and the cold, trying to provide hot meals and outreach and share all that, and it was going well. It is something that unfortunately, I can cook and I can do all that, but it's hard to keep up the funding just by yourself. And people were lovely. We had wonderful people donating and great support from the community. It just never took off, and that's just the Lord telling me that my responsibilities were elsewhere. Great idea, but that's not where the Lord wanted me. And He put it in my life to do this now. And that's what I'm doing. So, like I said, 15 millimeter, we're not going to be perfect. Just kind of, we're not quite just throwing it down. I do have a method to it, and I'm using a large brush to make sure I'm not getting in the super refined details. So that there will be contrast and places for the contrast paints to flow. And that's really all you have to do, is make sure that there's something to kind of block the areas that are the highlights, and then let it flow into the recesses. And that's all you gotta do with contrast paints. I mean, there's a bit more to it than that. You gotta glaze them and whatnot. Do y'all have a preferred paint brand you go to? I have been enjoying Army Painter because I enjoyed Citadel paints back in Warhammer end of 2nd edition, beginning of 3rd edition. So that kind of, solidified the color palette that I enjoy. And some of the newer formulas for the paints, they just don't quite do it for me. They don't have the right, je ne sais quoi, that I don't quite know what quality, right? The pizzazz or the vibrancy, something about it just isn't right anymore. So, Army Painter has a lot of the kind of closer to the older formulas, because they actually their like paint master mixer guy, was the guy that did the paint formulas for a while for Citadel, I think, or something like that. Maybe that's just urban legend. Don't quote me on it. I don't know. All I know is that I like it better than Vallejo, because I can be kind of messy and kind of sloppy with Army Painter, and it really doesn't mess up at all. You know, like, this guy, I've been really just letting him have it, and still, because of my brush selection, I'm able to kind of still pick out just the areas that I want to go over, and not anywhere where his weapon is going to cast a shadow. And it seems ridiculous for 15mm, but that's just the kind of extra, by selecting the right brush, you know, for the job, knowing what you're trying to do, you can very easily just get it done. And I think that's just the way that we are as people. I know I try to use the wrong tools or the wrong skill for so many things. And I don't know why we're like that. But we can change that, you know, by acknowledging and by driving for something simpler, by driving for something with more understanding. Maybe I'm making sense, maybe I'm not. Whenever I paint miniatures, I think I get really, like, deeply philosophical, and I'm not quite sure if it's... I know it's not the fumes, because these hobby paints don't have fumes, but... At least these ones don't. But... I don't know, something about just the introspection of having something so small in your hand and realizing that that's how our Creator sees us, you know? We are infinitely smaller in the grand scheme of things than a 15mm scale. And I'm barely taking too much care to paint this guy, but, you know, our Creator, whether you believe in that or you believe it's the universe or the Big Bang, something went through and formed us. I know I believe in the Creator, but you don't have to. Like I said, Bob Ross, if we are all just happy little accidents and that's the way you want to see it, I'm not here to judge where God has you on the path He has laid out for you. I only wish the best for you in your travels. And I hope you stop by here for a rest every once in a while. But we use the right tools on the tabletop. We use the right skills. Right? You don't want to use charisma when you're supposed to use intelligence. I'm pretty sure just talking to your tools to try to craft isn't working. I know it doesn't work when I try to paint or when I try to talk to the models to get them to be painted. Alright, so I cleaned out my brush because I'm going to move on while that white coat is finishing up. I'm going to go through and break out my very nice small tippy. And we are going to actually get into painting this guy's pants, clothing, feetsies, spider webs. You know, maybe spider webs is good for this guy. You ever just, like, look at some of the 3D printing, you know, what would be considered errors, and you're like, you know, I'm pretty sure spiders got to him. I'm pretty sure he's been laying there flattened by this rock. And the spiders are on him. So, I think I'm going to go through and give him some nice blue up in here, because I think it's going to contrast really well with the crimson and the blood effect that we have. That's going to be the nice squished man jam between there. And yes, we are starting with Dark Sky. I doubt you'll be following along like a paint by paint thing, but hey, you know what? If you wind up just using me to randomize the colors you're using on a model that you don't know about, I mean, it could be a model, it could be a canvas, whatever you are on, you could be doing one of those like gem bedazzle puzzle things. Do whatever your heart goes for. The important thing is we can be a community and talk and craft together. And I'm just using this nice darker blue. And yes, I actually am caring more about it now. And I don't really care too much if I go a bit too over. I can always recorrect with some white, but this blue is going to be covered very easily, especially with how thin I'm putting the layers on. I just want to go little bits because this allows me to do a little bit of that, you know, wet on wet kind of action, wet blending with the same color, so it's just dispersal. I probably need a better light if I'm going to be showing you all this, right? Or a better camera setup. But whatever the Lord has in store for me, that's where I will go. And right now, he said, paint, talk, and just see who comes out for the community. You know, when something tells you that somebody's in need, when something tells you that people are hurting out there, and this is the opportunity you're given, well, you can't really ask to be used as an instrument and then complain about how you're going to be used. And yes, I am getting that a little bit in there just because I feel like a lot of it is these undercloths. You know, he's got his little crotch banner there, but I feel like a lot of this right here is kind of the leftover of some of his tunic goodness. And a lot of it's going to be messed up by the red when we put that on there. I like just putting these small guys in an unused part of my paint palette because I don't really want them getting paint on anything. Especially these guys, we're kind of painting under them, which we don't have to. No one's going to see it. But I'll know it's there. And that's my problem. When you got a little bit of the autism, there's not much to be done about that. But hey, that's all right. The sun is shining. Well, the sun came out today, right? Shining or not, it was a new day. Every day is a gift. All right? It doesn't matter where you believe that gift came from. Once we start looking at every day we're given as a gift, then we can start really appreciating the little things just a little bit more. You know, you wake up in a bad attitude because it's something you got to deal with in the day. Well, it sucks you got to deal with it, but look at everything else that is possible. If you want to deal with that really annoying thing first, and then go out and treat yourself, or you have an opportunity to go and just spend time at a park looking at nature or animals. If you have time just to sit, you know, with a nice cup of tea or coffee or even just a good cup of cold or hot water, take that time. Sit, relax, rest. And that's why I know it might be very visually boring, but I figured this was something that you could throw on in the background while you craft or while you do whatever it is that you do. Maybe you're throwing this on while you're cooking. I love to cook. A lot of people said I probably should have been a professional cook, but I just like it for a passion. For those of you out there that like to cook, what's your favorite thing to cook? And then, oh, I just dropped one of my guys, and he's tiny. But that's okay, because I at least have clean floors. Easy peasy. Alright. These guys I have right here are these little town guardy guys. And I'm not too sure what colors I want to do them. Because they're a little bit different than the knights that I had with the red and the green. And I almost kind of see this separated as like official capacity versus very subversive capacity, right? Like the red and the green are like royal colors, but they're not quite armor. And this is where I really like building the NPCs for my world up as I'm painting them, because not very often do you get to do that. You don't get to just immediately build story for every little guy you have. So that's my goal, and that's what I do when I'm sitting here just feeling like I'm unproductive, but in reality I'm doing something that brings me joy, and I'm doing something that isn't intruding on the responsibilities I have. There's always a good balance, and we should always have a good balance. Take some time, do a craft, wind down a little bit, but set a timer, right? Set an alarm for an hour or 2 hours. Get up and do your responsibilities. Do what you got to do, and then come right back to it, right? Get yourself invested in something so that you're part of the way through it, so that you go and do something responsible, and that time flies because you're able to think about what your next step is on your other project. That doesn't work for some people, and I know that, but for the ones that it does, right? We all got to find our coping mechanism. We all got to find our anchor. And if anybody gets any sort of helpful hint, tip, idea, or notion from anything that I say, that's a win in my book. So I will throw all the information that could apply to anybody, and if something sticks for somebody somewhere, then mission accomplished. But I think I almost want to give them like that kind of, I almost want to say Lego Castleman, you know, with like a lot of the over-exaggerated like blues, oranges, reds, yellows. I'm not going to go super toy with it, but I do have this lovely pure red, right? And I think that as a start for kind of a lava orangey on the gambeson, because it looks like these guys are wearing some sort of leathered plate gambeson. You know, something a little extra sturdy, but not quite like a steel armor. So I want to bring that out, and then we can go through and dirty it down afterwards. But we're just gonna get it right on in here. And this is not a contrast for a speed paint. I do have the speed paint medium, but that's why I'm going a bit lighter. Yes, I am bringing it into an orange, so a bit lighter is nice. But also, this allows me to color correct with a speed paint when I go over it. So it will not darken as much because it's a lighter color underneath it. And that will control kind of a bit of our texture, but it will get into the recesses and it will still leave. What is it? How thick is this belt? Right? Even using the camera as kind of a magnifier, it's a little bit tricky to see where certain things begin and certain things end. But that's okay. Again, 15 millimeter, nothing has to be perfect. Yeah, I think the whole gambeson, not just the armor bits. We're gonna go just right on in there with all of it. Anybody who's gonna critique my brushwork or anything else, like, go for it. Congratulations, you have missed the point. And you know what? Blessings on you for it. You at least showed up, you tried to engage. You did something. I'm not a great painter. I'm not a good painter. I just enjoy taking the time away from every bit of the world that wants to bring me away from everything that's good and wholesome. Because the world wants to do that. Between politicians or people and even religious people, you know, they want you to give in to their way of thinking only, or they want to go through and exchange something for a lot of control or talk or anything else. We're just going to keep on going down these lineups. Wet my brush and reshape it a little bit. Use some of that to kind of fill in the recesses. Just be aware that not everybody that says something you don't like, not every one of those is a toxic person. Sometimes we need to hear some of the things we don't like, especially when it's truthful. And not everybody that says good things to you or flattery to you, and not everybody that does that is doing good things for you either. That's why one of the biggest prayers we're supposed to pray is for discernment, not necessarily, just being smart and not necessarily just noticing opportunities, but it's being able to look at situations and actually know through education, through our gut feeling, through the feeling of the Spirit in us, that discernment that drives us to understand what the reality of something is. It's not a jump to conclusion. It's a careful, studied, methodical thought process. What classes do y'all play when you play RPGs? Do you like to be sneaky? Do you like to be tanky? Do you like huge DPS? A mix of all of the above? I know I don't really go for magic users a whole lot when I do play. Normally I DM because forever DM. That's just the way it is. We will also be putting up videos of our D&Ds now that we have everything set up. I host a game night once a week. So when people are able to make it, we'll go through and have highlight reels and gameplay video for us playing on the big game table. Eventually, if we get decent supporters on Patreon, we will actually be rolling out an ability to have me DM for either your group or put together a group of Patreon supporters and run a D&D like that over Discord and using Foundry VTT, because I like Foundry. It's not the best thing. I don't think anything is the best thing when you're looking at software to run something that, you know, it can only predict you're going to do so much. But I think Foundry gives you a better blank slate than most of the other ones. They're easy to understand, they're easy to run, and you can make it as complicated and tech heavy as you want, or as minimalistic as you want. Plus, with Foundry, only the DM needs to actually have the license and software for it. Everybody else just gets joined in by a link. So it can be anywhere, anytime, basically. On top of that, I use Dungeon Alchemist for a lot of my map making. I like Dungeon Alchemist a bit better because of the mix of algorithm and procedurally generated things with the ability to edit. You know, it's not like feeding a prompt. It's more organic to kind of just, I don't want there to be any windows, or I don't want there to be any torches, and then you can populate with whatever you want. Alright, so I have just done all of these little guys with their basic colors. We're going to go through and let them dry, and I will be with you for the next color change. Alright, change it up a little bit. Everything is kind of dry, and as things cure, you're gonna actually, I got these little tweezers here so you don't have to look at my hands all the time. You can see how the color starts kind of curing on it, darkening or lightening depending on what the color, combination is. If you've been painting before, you know how this works. I just like being accessible to everybody, so if this is your first time painting certain types of paints, they will cure at a different color. That's why usually you see a tester dot, or some places you can 3D print, or you can buy a little tester cap that gives you something to put it on and lets it dry. That way you know what the final color is. I don't have time for that. I also think that life is far more of an adventure. So we're just taking our little guy, and from his gamison, which is the orangish red, we said we were kind of following the old school Lego colors. So I got some High Lord blue as a good base color here. Again, speed paints, because 15 mil, it really does make a difference with that. At other scales, I know speed paints can be a bit of a pain, but this just makes everything really nice. I'm going to try to keep it on camera here, but this is extremely awkward of a setup, especially at this size. So again, just kind of here to talk and paint and not stress, right? Or do whatever you're doing. If you're building Lego right now, what set are you building? Right? That would be phenomenal. I love Lego. But the odd thing is, the Lego set that I used to have, I'm not seeing it in like the Lego history anymore. If anybody knows about a Lego Millennium Falcon that had like a blue plastic tube around the back for the engine lights, that's the one I had, and it's not showing up on the two like official Millennium Falcon Lego set pages that I've seen. So if you know anything about that, please let me know. We'll just go through. I like batching out each piece. If I know I'm going to use that color, I just kind of make sure I have everybody at a place where they can be getting that color. And no, I really don't care if this blue goes over onto other things because it is going to tie in, but I only hit his cape, so I have more brush skill than I thought. I thought for sure I got a little more over than that, but no, actually it looks pretty good. Awesome. But let me know if y'all like the long form videos more, or if you like just keeping it kind of brief and topical. I know everybody's going to have a preference, and I want to cater to as many people out there as possible, just to make sure that everybody has a space to go. A space that's not pushing something down their throat all the time. And we'll just go right on to the next guy. Just getting that blue layered on there. Real nice. Real smooth. Trying to even out any brush strokes. Alright, the speed paint does a lot, and it pulls up where we leave it, which is good for getting that definition. But it's also just kind of getting these down and by. So I'm going to go through and just finish these guys up with y'all. Finish up some good spot. I know we're running a little bit long. I am going to kind of cut it a little short here in a little bit. Just going to get these guys kind of finished up and make sure that the blues and things on these guys have set up nicely, which it looks like they have. The rocks look good. So we'll finish off doing the blues through these guys, and we'll take a look at what our next color might be. We might do that with this video, or we might save it for the next crafting time. I want to do kind of each skill on the character sheet. I want to hit one of each skill, like main stat, not skill, but main stats. Hit one of those each week, or break them up for a couple of weeks. So this is the crafting, so it's intelligence check. Right now we're kind of doing a dexterity check for the type of crafting I'm doing, but as far as most crafting goes, making something completely, it's usually an intelligence check for a lot of systems. Some of them, they have it as different mechanics or have specific skills for it, which is interesting. I know my game that I'm building, we actually are divvying it up so that you have different crafting under different main stats, because that's the way it is in real life. If you have a craft that is mostly physical and not mental, like going through and making rope, it's a very physically exerting task. It shouldn't really be dependent on how smart you are. It shouldn't really depend on how fine motor skills you have when you're just pulling on something and twisting. The most basic of making rope, it doesn't really take a whole lot. That's where the system that I'm making and have getting ready for playtest here in a couple days. It's not about level or experience. It's about learning naturally, developing skills through actual player action and interaction with the world. And I think that's what roleplay is all about, and that was the core of it. And we're trying to get back to that core. So, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, let us know. We just got kind of temporarily another graphic artist, so it'll be interesting to see where that all goes. But if this will focus real well, there we go. You can see we have a nice kind of setup there. I think the next is going to be the browns that I do, because it's going to be boots, gloves, and the staffs for the weapons. And then after that, we'll wind up going into the metallics. I will clean up this blue when we move on. After this blue dries, there will be edge highlights, like I did on some of the... You'd think, oh, 15 mil, you can't do edge highlights on 15 mil. Well, I'm going to show you a very poor example of edge highlights at 15 mil. Just the kind of cape edges here. I wanted to pull it out of the darkness there. I think I will do another pass of those edge highlights, but you can see it on the very edges. I just wanted something to kind of break it up out of his, the depths of that crease there and such. So even at 15 mil, there's a lot we can do. And we all have our hobbies, we all have our crafts. Yours doesn't have to be mine, and mine doesn't have to be yours. But thanks for joining me. Thanks for having this wonderful crafting time, this intelligence check. Let me know what we should call each section. I'm still kind of playing around with titles and things. I'm new to this, so bear with me and my terrible, terrible editing. It is just me and my lonesome right now, but hey, God will provide. Stay blessed, stay calm, and keep crafting. I will see you in the next session.